Throughout history, free thinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me, as almost always, is Armin Navabi. Armin, good to see you again.
Great, thank you. We're pretending like we haven't been talking for the past half an hour.
Yeah.
So hi, Ali. It's great to see you. Oh, yeah, okay.
I know. So it's this is gonna be a really good show. So our good friend Melissa Chen is joining us, and most of you know Melissa. Many of you have known her for years. I mean, she writes those really smart, incisive, sort of very independent thinking, rational Facebook and social media posts. She was recently on Joe Rogan, so do check that out if you can. It was a really good interview. And now she's going to be joining us for the first time, actually, to talk about a whole bunch of things. And she's on her way. So when she's on, she'll be on and you'll see her. But I'll give you an idea of who she is and what we're talking about. So Melissa is a writer and she's an activist. She is the co-founder and the managing director of Ideas Beyond Borders. That's an organization we've discussed here many times. And our former co-host, Faisal Saeed Al-Mutar, is the other co-founder. He co-founded it with her. And she is also, as of recently, a columnist for The Spectator, the USA version, which was launched recently. So we're going to talk with her about IBB, the Ideas Beyond Borders, and what they do is they've translated countless sort of secular.
We're going to start with COVID. We're going to start with COVID stuff, though.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about her criticism of China. She's a very strong critic of China. She has talked about the kind of global geopolitical alignment that's going to happen after this whole pandemic, after COVID, and how this is going to affect geopolitics.
We're going to talk about Muslim Uyghurs, right? If we're talking China, we have to talk about
absolutely. So one of the main criticisms she has of China, her key criticism, is about their human rights abuses, and that obviously one of the most prominent issues is the Uyghur Muslims. So we're going to do that, and we're going to take your questions.
By the way, how worried should we be about the fact that we're taking positions against China so openly, and that one day China is going to take over the world, and what are we going to do? We're going to be and they're going to be world dictator and control everything. And they're going to look into our past and see how anti-Chinese government we were.
I don't think that's going
to happen. Yeah, I'm exaggerating. All right, I'm just kidding.
I've always thought, look, here's the thing. And since we're talking about this while we're waiting, the thing is that every power that is throughout history that has become sort of a world dominant power, it always started with some kind of ideology, right? So the Greeks, the Romans, they had these ideologies, things that they believed in, right? That they spread. The British Empire, right? They had this ideology. They had industrialization. They had all these other elements. Like the U.S. had its, freedom and liberty, Enlightenment values. The Soviet Union, which was a world power for a very long time, had communism and the Marxism and all of these things. So it really feels like I don't think China has anything sort of independent. It kind of like its economy is.
It does. China has the idea that we are Chinese and we kick ass and we're the greatest nation.
that's nationalism that happens.
Yeah,
Every country has that. Every country.
Yeah, but it's different with China because when you have the ideology that Chinese people are just superior in every goddamn way, you're talking every other country when they say that, they're talking about, I don't know, a small fraction of the planet. When China says that, that becomes like kind of like a religion more than nationalism, because 1 out of every 8 or 7 person in the world is like Chinese. Like it has a much more broad, and
not broad enough though. It's not globally scalable. Like communism, right, was globally scalable. Liberty and the U.S., the First Amendment, secularism, that was globally scalable. Christianity, Islam, these were all sort of global. You could spread them out. Industrialization, and that was globally scalable. But this stuff, the China's great, and I mean Quebec has that too, right? So.
Susanna's saying if CCP, basically CCP means Chinese Communist Party, comes for the secular jihadists, they have to get through all 125 pounds of me first.
I feel so much better. I feel protected. Thank you, Susanna.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Susanna.
This is like, yeah.
Wow, 125.
125 pounds. But don't. What's your height, Susanna? How tall are you? Throw that in there too. Just tell us how tall you are. Oh, better idea. But yeah. Anyway, so I don't know. I feel like when people talk about dystopias and you see all those dystopian movies, has there ever really been a long-lasting dystopia?
It don't have to be long-lasting. You could do a lot of damage if you like World War II. No, but that's not going to happen. I'm exaggerating, but I'm just being a cynic.
No, but that's like 1984.
Okay, I was joking because this is the reason why I think it's not going to happen. I think China is going to have a change in their identity and the values they stand for as GDP per capita grows. Okay, not GDP per capita. When GDP per capita grows, the values of enlightenment are going to grow from within China. There are more people in China with more power, with more wealth, and wealth means power, are going to make slow changes to the values and that their country stands for. I think democracy and freedom of speech are a function of people shifting. It's a balance between the government's power versus the people's power. Okay. So, and GDP per capita is a big factor in that. Again, it's not always the exceptions you can find are mostly in countries where government has other sources of power. Even if GDP per capita is high, the government is relying on other sources of income rather than its people to be able to just ignore its people, right? This is why oil is such a curse, is such a huge gift to authoritarian regimes, right?
Right.
But I think as more and more people in China have food security and safety and shelter, and they stop, they just start climbing that Maslow's hierarchy of needs and start demanding other things other than just security and food and shelter. And that's eventually how you're going to see a shift in China's values. I think. I hope.
Yeah, I know. Well, maybe they'll, or that is if they don't create another virus and kill the rest of us before that. I'm kidding. Don't go out and attack the Asians, please. It's bad. It's not their fault.
No, never mind. I was going to say something.
Oh my God. Yeah, I never knew. I never knew about these Asian jokes, whether I can make them or not, because technically we're Asian, Armin.
Yeah, I'm Asian.
So when people say Asian, if you go to the UK, when they say Asian, they actually mean people who look like me. Right. So,
well, This
East
is
Asians are the
I don't
East
know. I don't understand how East Asians all of a sudden dominated all of Asia. Like what happened when people like Asian? Oh, by Asian we mean like far, East Asian. They're like, what about the rest of us? Like we're
But that's
most of
only-
Asia. We're most of Asia. Like what the
That's
hell?
in North America. That's in North America. If you go to Europe, if you go to, well, I don't know about all of Europe, but if you go to the UK, Omema, you're there, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but when you say Asian in England, right, then that means people like us. People look like us, like brown people. Oh, you're not that. You're Aryan.
Yeah, but I mean, Russia is Asia mostly, and those are white Asians. But nobody thinks of Russians when they're talking about Asians. It's just, or like even in UK, when you say Asian, they're including, India and Pakistan, but they don't think about Middle East as Asian.
Omema, I just said Omema saying, "Bitch, I'm Aussie." She's Australia, so yeah, completely. Sorry, I got that wrong, Omema. If there's anybody in the UK, let us know. But nobody's gonna be in the UK. It's really late there. It's like 5 hours.
This is why we don't have that many patrons in the UK, because they're like, you never do live stream for us.
So I want to do live streams on Saturday and Sunday for the UK. I just found there's this one guy who wants to debate us. He was an atheist and then he reconverted back to Islam and he wants to challenge us, which is great. And he's done like videos and it looks kind of interesting to me. So I really want to have him on, but he's in the UK. So for those who don't know, Armin is in the Philippines and I'm in Toronto. So we're about 13 hours apart, right? So right now it's like 9:45 or 9:43 here in Toronto, and it's 10:45 in the morning there for you, right? So
me? No, 9:45.
Oh, so yeah, daylight. So we're exactly 12 hours apart. So that's what happens. So when it comes to scheduling stuff in the UK, we can only really do it on
Do it.
Actually, yeah. Why can't you just get up at 4 a.m? We're all in quarantine. Who cares? Right?
Oh, every Sunday I'm already up at 1 a.m. because we have every Sunday morning I have Atheist Republic Persian show. So my Sundays are. By the way, Filipinos are referred to as jungle Asians.
Jungle Asians? Why is that?
I don't know if that's common or not. I just saw it on TikTok.
Matt Rose, one of our patrons, is in the Philippines.
Yes, I know. He's half Saudi, half Filipino.
Oh, okay. That was bound. I'm surprised that doesn't happen more.
What?
The Saudi Filipino thing. I mean, there's a lot of Filipino people in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, because you're not supposed to. Oh my God! This I was going to say something. I don't know if YouTube allows that. Okay, again, this is not me because Saudi. Okay, because as a Muslim, you're not supposed to have babies with your slaves, aren't you? Like
slaves? Oh, yes, it's not. No. Oh God. Sorry, Matt. Sorry. Apologies.
No, I'm not talking. That's not my view. Like that's like Saudis treat like their Filipino maids as they see them as slaves.
Yeah, but how do you know that that's what the situation was here? We're talking specifically about one of our. Okay, anyway.
I wasn't talking about Matt. I'm talking about why it doesn't happen as much.
Yeah. So the other thing that we're going to talk about here, let me just move on instead of the banter, is, and I'm really interested to hear from Melissa about this, is...
is she messaging you, by the way, Melissa?
Yeah, she's going to be on within the next 15 minutes. So, one of the things I'm really interested in is what it's going, because, they're talking about how the U.S. relationship with China and pretty much everybody else's relationship with China, there's going to be a sort of political realignment of it after this pandemic because of how all of the missteps that China took initially with the cover up and, the false reporting of everything they did. And I'm just really curious about how the Trump factor fits into this, right?
Why? Okay.
Huh?
You're obsessed with Trump, I think.
No, it's a legitimate. I am obsessed with Trump because it's fun. It's a hobby. Like I enjoy my Trump derangement syndrome. It's like, it's a disease. I understand it's a disease, but it's a disease that's not like pancreatic cancer. It's a disease like sex addiction, which is a great disease to have. Okay. It's like alcoholism is a great fucking disease to have. You know what I mean?
Sex addiction is only a good disease to have if your partner is also a sex addict.
Who's talking about partners?
Oh,
I'm saying it's a good disease to have anyway. It's like you don't have to worry about your partner if you have sex with it. I have a disease. I'm sorry. That's what's so great about the disease. So I think Trump derangement syndrome is a little bit like that. So yes, that's true. But what I'm talking about is actually separate from that, because the way that Trump worked with China, the way that he kind of got played by them in a way, right? Like South Korea, Taiwan didn't get played by them. The Obama administration didn't get played by him. Bush didn't get played by China, but he kind of got played because he's kind of, I don't know what it is about him. I'm curious about how that's going to play a part in it. But Melissa's ready.
Yay!
So I'm sending her the link again in case she missed it.
Great.
And the chat.
Wait, we told people we're going to do Q&A while we wait for Melissa, and we didn't do any Q&A.
I told you not to write that. We can't commit. Armin, we're commitment phobes. We can't do that. We can't commit.
Right.
Things like that.
Oh no, Erin is going. No, Erin, don't go. Okay, Erin is leaving.
But just in time, Erin.
Susanna saying, I had several friends with sex addiction. It doesn't seem fun at all, catching diseases and shit.
That's true. Listen, I'm saying in the context of diseases. So if you were going to have to choose a disease to have, and you had to choose COVID-19, ovarian cancer, or sex addiction, and that's it. You have to have one of those, and there's nothing else you can do. I mean, to me, it's an easy choice. Well, for me, I would choose ovarian cancer because I don't have ovaries, as far as I know. But that was a bad example. But you know what I mean.
Just like most of your examples are bad examples.
Yeah. What are you going to do?
Anyways, where is Melissa?
She's coming. When she comes, she'll come, man. It's all right. Why? It's just
Jim is saying our videos look sharper today.
Thank you. Yeah, my connection's running a lot smoother today too. It seems like
this shows that the problem was always on your end.
Yeah. So
the Babylon part. Imagine being an incel and having sex addiction. Oh yeah, that's horrible.
Hey, you know what? There's a lot of this quarantine has created a lot of incels, like literally involuntary celibates, because they're just stuck at home and they can't really do anything.
That's not what you mean by incel. That doesn't what it means. Oh, never mind. Hold on.
That's exactly what it means.
Hi. Hi guys, how are you?
We're good. Welcome.
Sorry that I was a little late coming into the stream.
That's okay. You actually showed up 10 minutes earlier than I thought, so that's awesome.
This is great.
Not even 9:50 yet. So So let's just get into it. We already did your introduction.
Yeah. Let Melissa know, because she's going to be like, "Why are you not introducing me?" We spent a lot of time doing your intro, going through your praising you and telling everybody everything you do. So we got over that. So now that's why we're jumping into it.
So
that's great, because I really hate doing that part. So I'm glad that you guys took care of that for me.
First question is why have you been eating so much bat soup? That's what we really want to know.
I don't know, but the other day I paid my sister using Venmo, and you know how you got to put what you paid the person for. So I like to troll so I put bat soup so that everyone can see that that's what I was paying my sister for. Yeah,
I know so we're gonna start with I already talked about what we're gonna talk about, what's in the description and everything. So but can you just tell us a little bit about yourself for those of you? For those people here who first come
hates that part. We already did that, and she hates that part.
Yeah, I hate that part.
Yeah, move on.
No, this is how it is. This is how it is.
No, move on. She doesn't like it. Move on.
We should be doing
So you're originally from Singapore, right?
Yes, I am. I was born and bred, and I only moved to the United States when I was about 17, 18 for college, and never left. I loved it too much, and pursued actually an undergraduate degree in computational biology. So this pandemic coronavirus stuff is actually right up my academic interest. I spent about maybe a total of almost 10 years in research. And 4 of those was on the infectious disease platform. So I don't know how I, eventually transitioned to doing what I do now, which is, it's in such a different sphere. I think when I first started, I was so interested in asking, the question about what is human nature, right? And getting at that angle from hard science. So I studied genetics. I was very inspired by Richard Dawkins, actually. Mm-hmm. And eventually, I got this feeling that the view from biology was so limiting. It only explained, things in a very different way that it just didn't satisfy me. I needed to sort of immerse myself a bit in more of this world of ideas, and that's where eventually having the intellectual heroes that I had, Sam Harris, Steven Pinker, and all these other people, I started to appreciate there were a lot of different layers to what makes a person, in terms of outcomes, how they behave. I wasn't sort of considering the part about how psychology and ideas and what they believe actually come into play. And so I became much more interested in that. And that's when I really started writing. I started working with Faisal. And that was the way I got kind of, directed into this ideas orbit.
Yeah, you say that you came, I think it says on your bio that you came here for the education, you stayed for the civil liberties.
Yes.
Right. And now a lot of the work you do is really, you're a very strong critic of China, right? And its human rights abuses. And, you've got this background in infectious diseases, with graduate school. And all of that has totally come together now.
In a weird way. Yeah.
In a weird way. So, so I wanted to kind of start with that because just get your ideas on everything that's going on with China. Everything is politicized. People saying, well, we don't want to be too hard on them because it causes racism against Asians. And there's other people talking about how, China did everything and they're completely to blame for everything. And where do you stand on this? Like just based on your understanding of the disease, the pandemic, how they're usually contained, and the role of China in this and the way they misrepresented everything.
I mean, it should be obvious by now to the world that China is a malevolent entity. It was obvious in the past few years already leading up to this. There should have been several wake-up calls. One of them was obviously, the trade issue. The other one was how they treated Hong Kong. They've been increasingly expanding their, territorial ambitions in the South China Sea. Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore have been disputing a lot of islands that China has been laying claim to. And so all these actions have slowly showed us that China has, ambitions to be a global world power, but that their value system and the value system of the free world are completely at odds with each other. And so the question for the free world is, what do we do about this? And it feels like with the pandemic, at least how they've handled it, that a lot of people, at least in the West, have finally kind of woken up to this issue.
Right.
The propaganda, the way they've infiltrated certain institutions like the WHO, and the fact that they've completely bungled this pandemic. They've silenced whistleblowers. They could have acted in a way that this wouldn't have been the outbreak. It wouldn't have been this bad if they had taken certain actions early on. But they didn't, and it's directly a result of their political system.
They've made it easy for people to scapegoat them too. Like the administrations, like in the U.S., the administration had a lot of colossal failures when they handled it. But China's given them an opportunity to completely use them as a scapegoat, and legitimately, right? And blame them. The WHO, as you said, has always been sort of partial to China. So it's kind of discredited them as well. But there's been a lot of consequences of this.
Right.
Armin, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, wait, Melissa, you can respond first.
And, and the other thing also is that the actions that they have taken since, by not allowing the WHO to come into the country, right immediately after the pandemic, they reported the pandemic, they prevented for quite a few weeks any independent investigators. And then when Australia called for an independent inquiry, they threatened Australia with banning imports. And you ask the question, like, if you were trying to hide something, what would you do, right? Would you welcome an independent inquisition into something, or would you try to, sweep everything under the rug? And the thing also is that right after this happened, they said, oh, this came from the market, had something to do with the bats, and this market is the ground zero. Well, they quickly shut it down. They washed everything in 24 hours. So we've never been able to go back to the crime scene. We've never been able to send anyone there. And where are the virus samples? It would have really expedited research around the world in trying to understand this virus if China had allowed other labs around the world to study the virus, but they never sent samples.
Yeah.
Is it not strange that this is what took people to act as a wake-up call? Like, wasn't China's treatment of the Muslims and the 1 million people that they have in the concentration camps, isn't that like astronomically higher? Like, in a world that we keep mentioning never forget, and we keep having like Holocaust memorials all over the planet and things. Yeah. And we have gotten closer to that era than anything I can remember, given the way China is treating their Muslims. And it seems like most of the world doesn't really give a shit. It seems like all those memorials and all the, everything that we say about, never forget and avoiding the crimes of, Nazi Germany and stuff like that. None of that, it's all for show. And I mean, why is that not getting enough attention?
Well, so what's interesting to me is why it doesn't get enough attention specifically from Muslim majority countries, especially the Gulf countries, the Arab regions.
Right.
Because
Iran. And Iran as well. Yeah.
Actually, the only Muslim majority country
Turkey.
that is Turkey and Qatar. Then Qatar has also decided to refuse supporting what China is doing with the Uyghurs. But I think the silence there are a few reasons for the silence, right? It's become so politicized, this Uyghur issue, because you have countries like New Zealand, Australia, Europe, countries in Europe and America sort of standing up saying, we don't stand for this at all. This is terrible. They signed this UN letter. And then on the flip side, you have Pakistan and all these other Arab states sort of saying, no, it's fine. And it's, for a world in which they always try to highlight how the West mistreats Muslims, and play the Islamophobia card. Why are they closing one eye about this? And there are several reasons. The first of all, which I think is right up there, is the Belt and Road Initiative. A lot of these Arab countries have received a lot of investments from China. And the One Belt, One Road Initiative is basically China's way of investing, putting in a lot of money to sort of reach out to these countries, and it's a soft power diplomacy play. And they've been very successful at it. So, Pakistan is one of the major beneficiaries. That's one reason, because of the huge economic incentives, which, by the way, the US and the West is also guilty, right? Like, we don't stand up for human rights positions because we have special interest with, like, Saudi Arabia, for example. So we don't say anything about Khashoggi. And the other issue is also that I think for a lot of Arab countries, they tend to be very authoritarian, and authoritarians hate interference, right? They want to keep their domestic issues separate. So in a way, it's like they don't want to criticize China because they don't want to draw attention to their own abuses to themselves. So there's that. It's like a solidarity, basically, on non-interference.
Yeah, there's another thing actually for Pakistan specifically. Pakistan's always been sort of playing the U.S., playing that two-sided game with the U.S., and they've been playing China and the U.S. Against each other to sort of get aid, right? So they want U.S. aid, and everybody criticizes, like, why are you giving them U.S. aid when they're two-faced to you? And the reason the U.S. does it is not because they want Pakistan necessarily on their side. They just don't. They know that if they don't, then Pakistan's going to go to China.
Right.
And so that's why there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy in Pakistan when it comes to like all of these other abuses of Muslims, this, Muslims that. Didn't open a Diet Coke on a plane, so that woman got pissed off on the plane. That was Islamophobia. But when it comes to China putting Muslims in concentration camps, it's underground concentration camps. It's absolutely insane. Yeah.
When it comes to Saudi Arabia, they went beyond saying that this is fine. They actually congratulated China for the way that they are fighting against Islamic terrorism. Saudi Arabia congratulating an atheist regime for the way that they're treating Muslims, and so it's amazing. But
I think there's another angle to that too, which is that because what Beijing claims, right, is that the Uyghur controversy is actually Western propaganda. It's aimed at hindering China's progress by creating some sort of ethnic minority divisions within their country, because they're saying the Uyghurs they're a separatist movement, they are extremists. Just the sheer act of their religion is extremist, right? So they prevent them from growing their beards out. They regulate everything. They in fact even control what they can and cannot eat. So it's starting to become a situation like the Spanish Inquisition, where if you don't eat pork, you are now accused of extremism and you are sent to these re-education camps to become Chinese. And it's very similar to what the view of some Arab states with regards to the Kurds and the Yazidis and other ethnic minorities. They see those minorities as Western supported movements to sow some sort of internal strife in their country. So that's another reason why these states don't want to support, make a show for it and don't want to support the Uyghurs.
Mm-hmm. Another factor is a lot of authoritarian regimes like Saudi Arabia rely on United States hypocrisy when it comes to supporting human rights. For example, as you mentioned, United States keeps pointing out Iran's human rights violations, but not Saudi Arabia's human rights violation, because one is an ally, one is an enemy. And a lot of these authoritarian regimes always, banked on the fact that United States will, support them. But as United States loses its influence slowly, people like, countries like Saudi Arabia are looking to China as an alternative, source of support. Right. And that's what, But one thing I've noticed is that some Muslims are now slowly talking more about China as a way to warn people about how bad atheism could be if you don't.
Interesting.
So I was a bit tempted to let them, because we get tired of people comparing, communist regimes and to what atheism could lead to. But when it came to China, I was like, if this is what it takes for you guys to talk about China, go ahead and do it. I don't care like that, because at least.
So actually, there's actually a law in China that kids could not be educated in religious institutions. So you can't actually send your child to religious schools. Like, that is actually illegal. You're right. It's a top-down atheist state that sees all religion, and not even just religion, even anything that is just dissent against the Chinese government.
Not even dissent. If it's or any organization that is, any form of if you in China, if you start becoming organized and you start to create a group and you don't say anything against the Chinese government, as soon as you become too big and you have any source of authority in there other than the Chinese government, you're a threat. They consider you a threat before you even start talking against the government.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, several billionaires have been exiled or, have been thrown behind bars.
Right.
The power is so big, it just threatens the rule of Xi Jinping.
So how does this lead to us? Let's go to back to COVID-19, right? Did you, given what we know about the Chinese government and the way they act, did you expect all of this? Is this something that was completely in line with how they operate? Were there any surprises?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think covering things up and saving face is part of the cultural DNA of the Chinese. There's this notion that anything that embarrasses the party, that makes them look bad, is something to be avoided. And so, you know, in a basically what this means is that they're not committed to truth, right? If truth is something that embarrasses you, then you're not committed to it. And if you think about the things over the course of history that China has covered up or still has not come to a moral reckoning with, I mean, say what you want about the West, but there is debate here about the sins of our past. We're able to talk about slavery and how that was a terrible institution. I mean, for Christ's sakes, the 1619 Project just won a Pulitzer. China has not ever come to terms with even what Mao did with the Great Leap Forward. The Cultural Revolution has not been acknowledged. When people talk about the deaths, how many people were persecuted in the Cultural Revolution, the estimates go from 100,000 people to 20 million. And it's like, you know, because there's no reckoning of it. And Tiananmen Square, we don't know how many students died in that protest in 1989. Even their economic numbers, a lot of economists highly dispute China's reported GDP numbers. So it's you know, I kind of really resent when people try to compare the two systems or the two, you know, like the West and China. It's not even on the same level.
Why did so many, like in this case, why did people fall for it? Like Taiwan didn't fall for it, right? They didn't trust what was happening in China. South Korea didn't. I mean, they took the other countries that were able to handle this pandemic. A lot of the reason that they didn't is because they also went through SARS, SARS in 2002, 2003. So that was also it. But why was the U.S. so? I guess it seemed like they were completely trusting everything that was coming out of there.
At first, I mean, I just think when it came to the Western governments and includes Europe as well. Europe, there is just too much inertia when it comes to we just don't have effective governance. That's the start of it. And you're right. I think that the memory of SARS was so really weighed heavily on parts of Asia that they were able to just draw on that expertise and act very quickly. Also because they are in the neighborhood of China's sphere of influence, that they're a lot more distrusting. There's also a bit of this past, right? Japan. People think like, I think in America, there's this notion that all the East Asian countries sort of like is this harmonious, monolithic area of the world, the Far East, the Orient. No, they kind of hate each other. And there is historical baggage, right? The Japanese not trusting the Chinese, the Koreans not trusting the Chinese. Even Vietnam and China has historical rivalries that I think affect their attitudes towards China today. And everyone who is part of, you know, I know the ASEAN bloc, for example, so Southeast Asia in general, the reason why they form a bloc together is to you know, sort of come together to sort of in solidarity form a bloc that at least can push back against the Chinese in a more coordinated way.
Right.
So what is it that we're exactly accusing the Chinese government of lying about? Because there's a lot of theories being thrown out there, and some of them are actually ridiculous conspiracy theories, and some of them are more likely, and some of them, I don't know. So what is it like? What are the multiple theories about what happened and how the government there is responsible, and which one of them are true?
So I think the things that are disputed is the timeline, right? So one thing is the timeline. We're not really sure when the first case was. It seems like the first time China ever reported anything to the WHO, it was 31st December, but the first case actually happened November 17th. And it had no connection to the Wuhan seafood market. So the origins of the virus, the timeline of the virus, what's really going on in that lab, you know, where are the virus samples? Can we study that? And also, if you are lying about certain numbers that you're reporting, right? So, like, say, number of people that have been affected, number of people dying, you're giving other countries wrong information on which their modeling depends on. So, you know, this Imperial College studies and all this modeling that the Western countries are doing is based on inputs that to begin with are false. How are we going to solve this?
By the way, Melissa, your microphone is touching your hair a little bit.
Sorry.
No, the one.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Okay.
Perfect.
So there's also another factor. I mean, the U.S. also signed a trade deal with China. I mean, that was kind of ongoing around the same time. It was October, November.
The phase one.
Yeah, the phase one of it. Now, how does that play into it? Could this be a unique circumstance where they actually tried to hide it and underplay it a lot more because that trade deal was finally becoming operational after this whole trade war that they've been having? Or is this something that probably would happen anyway?
I think they understand that there will be consequences for something like that. But I don't think that the world would have reacted so angrily to the point where all of a sudden now, basically all the countries have seemed to have woken up about the supply chain issue, right? Questioning why is it that we've had very critical supply chains located inside China? And,
right.
and like people are starting to really question this, and it's all over the world. So, in terms of also even their Belt and Road Initiative now, I think China is they're receiving some pushback on that. Like maybe we don't want to be dependent on Chinese. Maybe we don't want to sell them access to our ports, and be caught in a debt trap diplomacy situation where we're basically hamstrung by their economic muscle.
I mean, the debt traps are not that easy. And a lot of people don't know what the debt traps are. Like China comes and gives you debt. Lends you money to be able to do giant projects like ports and stuff. But a lot of them, the countries are not going to be able to pay it back. And then what China does is that they come and the collateral was them controlling the ports, right? And that's how China gets a lot of influence, by controlling a lot of ports around Africa and many other places. But the thing is that a lot of people say even if that's the case, even if the collateral was too much, is still in favor. It's still, those countries still benefit from it. Like they didn't have to move into this deal. Like it was either building these infrastructure is going to help Africa, whether China comes in and controls it or not. They're going to hire a lot of people there. I mean, some of these deals also says that you could only hire Chinese people. So that's
exactly.
There's
a lot of resentment in Africa about this lack of trickle down. Like it was claimed that this was going to benefit the country, but in the end, only the elites were getting, like the government, the people like 1% on the top who were signing the business contracts, they were the ones getting all the benefits. And now you couple all of this with the news, like out of Guangzhou, that the Chinese government there was actually mistreating. There's open racism, right? You want to talk about systematic discrimination when Africans are being kicked out of their apartments, and like this has caused a big wake-up call, I think.
Yeah, there was a movie that showed, I forgot the name of the movie, but there was this disgusting propaganda movie by China that showed that they were coming to Africa and how Africans were like looking at the Chinese people like saviors and these evil Americans. Every single American was this evil person. I don't know if you've seen it. It was this action movie. It was so disgusting. Like it was the most racist thing I've ever seen in a movie.
Well, you remember the ad? You remember that ad for the detergent where a Chinese woman puts the boyfriend into the washing machine, and he was black. Yeah.
Black guy goes in,
and he comes out clean. Exactly. No, I mean it's very blatant. I think you grew up in Iran, you grew up in not really, Saudi Arabia, but we're familiar with Asian culture in a way, and broadly. There are a lot of similarities, even though Iran is so different from Pakistan, so different from East Asia. But there are a lot of similarities. They are largely honor cultures, you save face. And
they're very racist. I mean,
that's exactly what I was going to bring up. And that's why I think, when we moved here and we started hearing intersectionality arguments about how, only certain people can be racist, this is when people like all of us here stand up and say, no, that's not at all true. Because we grew up in cultures and societies in which we notice our own kind, our own people being racist and extremely.
That's also one of the reasons why the term people of color drives me insane, because it's this umbrella term that includes all of us. So that includes the the sort of Arab, guy with the superiority complex who has a black slave, or the Pakistani person. It includes, and we're not the same. I mean, I just don't have, if I am with a black person, right, and I go up to them and I'm like, oh, it's okay, I know we're together in this, we're all people of color. I was like, well, I have a higher chance of getting a well-paid IT job.
Right. No, and it ignores that power dynamics are not rooted in exactly race everywhere in the world, right? Like, so obviously in China, white people are the ones who are being discriminated against. Yeah. And it's the Han Chinese who are the majority, and they're the ones who wield power.
It's almost white supremacist, actually, the POC thing, because everything's compared to this white people and everybody else. Right. It
exactly.
just sort of...
It reinforces whiteness in a way. Yeah.
But here's the difference, though. Okay, so let's look at these three countries: Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China. Here's an interesting difference between the three of them. So, Saudi Arabia is authoritarian, but they don't have any interests, like, relatively to the other two, beyond their borders. They do have some, like, they invest in schools, they spread the Salafi ideology. I think they regret that now, given what Al-Qaeda is doing to them. But they don't have any imperialist agendas. They're just mostly defending themselves against Iran rather than trying to expand beyond their borders. If you look at Iran, though, Iran is interested in controlling the areas around the Middle East, right? And not like it's trying to create a Shia empire. It's interested in Lebanon, Syria, Bahrain, Iraq, especially Iraq. And they do go beyond their borders. They are interested in creating an empire, but mostly are in that area. What's different with China, if you actually can start looking at their propaganda, and this is not something they're hiding, they are trying to dominate the entire planet. Like, I'm not saying
and space also,
and space, right? Like, they are not, like, if you look at the propaganda that they're creating for Chinese people, they're not even hiding this. They want to become not just a world leader. They don't just want to replace the United States. They want to dominate the entire planet, and they think they're going to be able to do it. And, they're not very shy about it.
Right. That's true.
Right.
But I think I don't know why there's a bit of this. I saw your tweet earlier today, Ali, about white guilt. And I think because there is that residual white guilt, that we're less likely in the West to want to assume malign intentions. Also, I think we're so afraid of this otherizing narrative that a huge faction of our elites, government leaders, corporate leaders are afraid to call China out for what it is, because they don't want to be seen as sort of putting out this otherizing rhetoric that could be incendiary, and we're sort of so wary about the last time this sort of thing happened, right after 9/11.
Well, and also,
wait. I need to say this. It's so interesting because people are so worried about creating the right image of things that they're ignoring the actual, they're so worried about, oh my God, this is going to look racist, where China is putting Muslims in millions in concentration camps. You can't get worse than this. We can't get worse than this. So rather than avoiding actual harm, you're just trying to pretend to create an image of not being racist or not being bigot.
Yeah.
And you saw some of this in reaction to how the media was reporting on coronavirus. So, a lot of people here was saying that Chinese coronavirus, that term itself was racist. Or I saw there were articles criticizing Joe Biden's attack on China, saying that was racist. What's interesting is that, never once had the media ever said that using terms like Russian interference was racist against Russians. We just didn't care. We didn't bother to separate the Russian government from the Russian people. But somehow, when it comes to China, we're walking on eggshells, and it's I think it's coming down to this, intersectionalist ideology that's really infiltrated our discourse in a way that's made it very difficult to really pin the blame on anything.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think that if it was called, I don't it wouldn't have really shocked me if it was called the Wuhan virus. It's the last thing I would have thought. But I actually thought it was going to be called the Wuhan virus.
Me too.
Right? Because when it comes to African regions, no one cares.
Right.
Like West Nile, Ebola, these are all sort of African areas. The dengue, all of these things, they don't worry about it when it's Africa. When it's China,
it's a centuries-old naming convention. But what that shows is that Chinese propaganda and Chinese money can go a long way in influencing public perception. The Africans can't afford it, and they're not invested in this narrative war. But the Chinese are.
Yeah. To be fair, though, that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are trying to, like, if you already have a name, it's called COVID-19, and some people are insisting on calling it a Chinese virus even after you already have a name for it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't call it like a Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus, but there are people who are actually bigots. Like, we shouldn't ignore the fact that there are the bigotry against Chinese people is a real big thing, and it's
And I want to add something to that. This is what I was going to say. So Armin, like he nailed it. And this is what the problem is. At the time we're living in, there is a lot of divisiveness, and there are all these issues going on that are related to bigotry. So people are a little bit more conscious about it, and I think they're probably conscious about it somewhat legitimately, right? So, when they have, so the problem is that when you say Chinese virus, if somebody else says, the virus in China, Chinese virus, it wouldn't really raise any alarm bells. It's like the wall. It's like building the wall on the southern border. People have talked about it before. Hillary Clinton's talked about it before. Many people talk about stronger immigration, but supposing someone says that, okay, we want to build that wall because we want to take in immigrants. This is a land of immigrants. We want to help as much as we can, but we have limited resources. So we need a system that is smart, that can help people balance giving people opportunities with, not with remaining a nation and having borders. So someone said that and said, okay, let's build a wall. I think a lot of people wouldn't see that as a problem. But when you say build a wall because Mexicans, rapists, there's a caravan coming to attack us, that makes it suspect. So it's the same kind of thing. If you say Chinese virus, there's somebody, Fauci comes on and says, this is the Wuhan virus. I don't think anybody would care. But when it comes from Trump and he tweets it that way, everybody knows what he means, right? What his intention is and the kind of thing that he's trying to drum up.
I mean, but he did explain that his intention was to, he really started driving this home after China started. In fact, not just China, but I really mean the foreign ministry, the spokesperson of the Chinese foreign ministry was promoting this conspiracy that the virus is actually created by the CIA in a US lab and brought to Wuhan. A conspiracy, by the way, that has gained a lot of traction actually in the Arab world. So that's actually one of the things that
Iran as well. The Ayatollah Khamenei himself came out and spread that on the New Year's speech.
Right, exactly.
But he thinks everything was done by the CIA too.
The top 3 conspiracies that we've tracked in Arabic, and this is promoted by RT Arabic, Chinese state media in Arabic, is that it was created by the U.S. It's also a Zionist conspiracy. It was created by the Jews, and also it's a way to punish the gays. So these are the top 3 most popular conspiracy theories, and they're not mutually exclusive somehow in that part of the world. So
those gay Zionists.
I think people like Trump and other gay Zionist Americans. Yeah. I think people in the Trump administration were really hammering this home because it was reactionary against what they felt was the Chinese government sort of, at the highest levels really promoting this. It's not your Chinese Alex Jones saying this. This was actually the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So there is that difference. But of course there are bigots. I think it's funny because I've been talking to Yasmin quite a bit about this stuff, and that you see certain parallels, right? So between, for example, the term Sinophobia and the term Islamophobia, that the Chinese Communist Party is starting to exploit this conflating criticism of the Chinese Communist Party as anti-Chinese racism or anti-Chinese bigotry. And they're very happy to let the concept creep and sort of overlap to the point that it becomes blasphemous, even in a secular society, to criticize the Chinese government, because doing so is going to be, racism. Right. So there are a lot of parallels that are shaping up between the stuff that you guys have been talking and trying to bring attention to for the longest time, and the kind of games that the Chinese government's playing. And also with regard to the way they're structuring society, in the sense of complete totalitarian control over how you think, how you dress, imposing a sort of, I wrote about this once for Spectator, about how there's this concept of almost like what you have with the Ummah, the global Ummah.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to impose this sort of takfir situation where any dissent is, you're basically outside of the Ummah. And that's, whether you're Tibetan, you're Taiwanese, you support the Hong Kongers, you're outside the Ummah. You're no longer a part of it. So there are a lot of similarities there. And I don't know, I don't think that has actually been explored yet, but. Yeah,
you talk about the alignments between Islamofascism and Chinese authoritarianism, and the way that both of them have parallels. And I could completely agree with you. I mean, and
blasphemy, they have their own, they're erecting their own walls. You can't criticize them.
The reason, the interesting thing is, for example, if you compare different sects of religion, there's a lot of similarities as well. Not because sometimes it is because they're copying each other, but a lot of times it's not because they're copying each other. A lot of times it's because there are certain tactics that just work. And that's why you see parallels. And maybe this is why you also see the parallels that,
So it's kind of like independent co-evolution, like flightless birds have evolved independently several times on different continents. Right.
Or eyes. There are examples in evolution where you got eyes that are not even, from different sources. So so that's very similar. But one thing I want to make sure that we clarify about what we're saying. We're not saying that because it's based on everything I've seen, is the virus is completely natural. It's not man-made, based on genetic sequencing. I don't know, can you clarify if this is accurate or not? What you are suggesting is that this could have potentially a natural virus is leaked out of the lab in Wuhan accidentally, and they're trying to cover that up. I just want to make sure we're clear about what we're saying.
I don't think, none of the theories have been ruled out yet, whether it's the wet market theory or the lab origins theory. What seems unlikely is that this was a bioweapon. And the reason for that is that, it's a bit of Occam's razor reasoning as well, which is if you were trying to achieve certain political outcomes, why engineer a virus a brand new virus that you can't even control, and that's not targeted. So there's that reasoning. But a lot of people are looking at, you're hearing the phrase gain of function research a lot. They're looking at, why is it that first and foremost, there appears to be no bats sold at the Wuhan seafood market. And yet there's this lab that was not far away from it that, where researchers have been studying bat coronaviruses. And the specific bat species from which this virus has most homology to is actually located in Yunnan, which is miles away from Wuhan. So that's where the bat reservoir is, in these caves. And it just doesn't make sense that it would just show up in Wuhan unless, this was really a lab accident. And I don't know about, I worked in labs for about 10 years of my life. And I almost killed myself twice through just lab accidents. It just happens. You're supposed to be pipetting under a hood and you didn't follow protocol. And the next thing you know, you're in the medical department because the bacteria that you're working with aerosolizes. This happens.
I stabbed myself under a culture hood once, and this finger went right to the artery, spraying all of a sudden, contaminated everything. And unfortunately, it was a sterile thing. I was cloning a retrovirus. But it was just working with viruses.
This has happened. Researchers have accidentally inoculated themselves with harmful bacteria. I had a friend who was looking at a gonorrhea sample like this, and it fell into his eye. Mistakes happen, and we cannot rule that out yet. It's just not been ruled out.
Yeah, I think that the idea that I was just going to say with the bioweapon theory. is you're absolutely right. The idea that this was actually manufactured, even though it has homology to like bat genetic material from bats and so on,
and
it doesn't seem.
And pangolin.
Yeah, and pangolin.
It's kind of strange because the RNA seems to have most homology to the specific bat coronavirus, but then there's this part of the spike protein, the RBD, the receptor binding domain,
the one that attaches to ACE2.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's not go into too much of the technical stuff because Armin will start freaking out. But
hey, I worked in lab I used to be a biology student in university in Tehran and University and University of British Columbia.
Let's tell us more about this ACE2.
No, but most of my work was with plants, so not as exciting.
Yeah. Oh,
but okay. So, but here's my question: why is China not like the people that are involved in China's government policy? These people are smart people, okay? They know what they're doing. So what I don't understand is what is going on in their thinking when they're trying to hide this information, given how we've seen time and again that the truth has a habit of leaking out somehow, and you're never going to be able to fully contain it. And also, what gets the worst PR is usually not the information that you were trying to hide itself, is the fact that you were trying to hide it itself. That gives worse PR than whatever you were trying to hide.
I agree. Because they actually prevented. There was a government policy that they instituted saying that if you are a university in China and you want to publish any research that has to do with the origins of this virus, you have to get approval first. So that became a policy. So now even academics in China are not allowed to actually publish anything in a peer-reviewed journal without express approval.
So my
that was crazy. I remember when that happened.
But my thinking goes like, because what we are seeing and when it comes to Hong Kong, when it comes to other the history of how this goes, it seems like it's very apparent to us that this doesn't work. So, and I don't think the people that are...
What do you mean when you say this doesn't work? What do you mean by this?
So, it doesn't work for PR purposes. Trying to hide information doesn't work. But the reason why I think maybe they decide to keep doing it anyways is because we are not the people that the Chinese government is worried about. They're mostly worried about the local PR rather than international PR.
Well,
and they have been successful at managing their local.
Oh yeah, it's complete. It's complete, right? Suppression. But I think the issue here is this: it's that, so you're right about the PR situation. I think it looks so bad for China that they're pursuing all these actions, and it makes them look so guilty and just so like they have such malign intention. However, what has the West ever done in response to that? We let Tiananmen go. We didn't come in to support the Hong Kong supporters. Like, what has been the consequence for them in a material sense? Right? At the end of the day, they know they can fight narrative. If this is just going to be fought on the information level, China knows it can win now because it's not economically not yet the strongest economy, militaristically not yet the strongest military. But in terms of information warfare, it is so good at waging it. And they know how to exploit the hang-ups of liberal, open societies. They've studied us. They know how that's done.
So is there...
So just to be clear, internationally, they care less because so far there hasn't been any major consequences. But
I think they're emboldened. They're very emboldened. They know that there's no political will to solve this.
But is it fair to say the reason behind hiding this information is mostly because the consequences of their local population getting the right information is higher than the foreign community, and they have been successful. So the hiding of the information and not letting people publish this information and all that is mostly for them hiding it from their own people. Is that accurate? Do you think?
Yeah, but I'm sure they're also trying to control the information that gets out. They're still going to try to do it, to implement every policy possible.
Okay.
So that's, so if I think that's interesting what you're saying, that this is they know that this is all just being fought at the information level and just at a PR level. So they're not intimidated. Like, what's the U.S. going to do? They haven't done anything in the past. So in this case, you think Trump has a point in the way that, well, I mean, in the sense that he's been sort of more aggressive. He's been criticized for, like the tariffs, and I don't know too many details about it.
He definitely has a point in the sense that he was the first, our China policy hasn't changed since Nixon. We just kept trying to engage because we hope that engaging with China on trade and economics will liberalize them naturally. This was Milton Friedman's theory. And for a long time, the world sort of operated on this assumption. So Trump was the first politician in the West to really challenge that. And my one criticism of that challenge, though, is that it's the framing. He sort of framed it as America first, as we're here trying to bring jobs home, look at the ways he was screwed. Not to mention, the way he was explaining tariffs also didn't really make sense to local consumers who are going to see prices skyrocket anyway and pay the price for the tariffs. If he had framed this more as a geopolitical issue, I think that would have been probably preferable, because it is. It is. And he is right to challenge China on this front. But the way he was framing it as America first wasn't the right way to frame it.
So beyond the framing, what about the policy proposals? Yes.
I think people are waking up to the fact that. So I had a friend of mine who was a journalist said, he started going to places like the Midwest where you had a lot of farmers. And one of the biggest crops that China imports from the United States is actually soybeans.
Right.
And you would think that, your average soybean farmer in the Midwest was going to be really angry about Trump's policies. It turned out that this cost was something they were willing to bite. I don't know if you're seeing this rhetoric in Canada, but in the US, you're starting to see now people saying, I actually don't mind paying a bit more. I don't mind paying a bit more for these, I don't want to be hooked on cheap China products from Walmart, because this is an issue of national security. This is an issue of geopolitical survival and about preserving the free world and the world that ushers in all these liberties that we enjoy.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. I think the main mistake by Trump was that he has alienated a lot of other allies that could have been. It's harder to take a position against China when you have less friends, right? I think what you're seeing in the world right now is that, because of Trump and people, the liberal world is much less united right now than the authoritarian world. The countries who are authoritarian, they seem to have each other's back, and the countries who are the countries who are liberal are more divided than ever before. And usually, the liberal countries were led by United States, and now without that United States.
But don't you think one of the reasons for that is actually a bug and feature of liberalism, in the sense that when you have an open society, it's a lot easier for authoritarians to hack your open society and sow mistrust in a way that we have no access. We have no way of doing to authoritarian countries. We don't even have access to their markets. China does not allow us or any of our U.S. companies, tech companies, to operate in their country.
Yeah, but I mean, that's when it comes to demographics. But when it comes to, international politics, liberal countries, I mean, they're one thing they're good at is like finding allies when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, that's something you could do that's when you look at the intelligence side and the military side of liberal governments, they're not really bothered about who's in the White House or who's like in the Congress, right? They do their thing. And I think, so I think on that front, they could have, like, these countries could just be like, they could have been united more, and they could have, I just think, like, especially United States became such a hypocrite. The way, like, capitalism was used against communist country was very effective, right? Like, at that time, during the Cold War, if you look at what the United States and other capitalist country did. They waved that capitalist flag so hard in every communist country's face. They realized that this is not just a military fight. This is an ideological fight, right? And I felt like if we continued the same policy, but instead of capitalism, it could have been about liberal Enlightenment values, human rights. You could have been consistent with that. But given that how inconsistent and hypocritical the United States and other countries have been on that front, that flag is useless now, right?
They're limited because it's economic codependence. They're just limited by that. I mean, that's the reason. I mean, if you look at any situation where one country is not waving the flag of their ideology in another's face, usually they will do it everywhere else. They'll promote democracy everywhere else in the world. I remember growing up in Saudi Arabia, they used to talk about how when the first Gulf War was happening and be like, oh, Iraq, these are extremists and we have to go at them. But Saudi Arabia, it was considered a moderate country that is their allies. And Saudi Arabia was like the Taliban with a lot of money. So it was just a framing, the way that the world is right now with all of this sort of economic codependence.
No, it is. But I think, one of the reasons why the U.S. won the Cold War too is because these countries were strong. If you think about the economic position that the United States was in relative to the rest of the world, right up to late 1990s, early 2000s, we're no longer in that position.
That's true.
So we're not projecting any strength. So how can countries don't want to sign up for that. They look at us, we're dysfunctional. Look at our response to COVID-19.
To North Korea, I mean, Kim Jong-un, to a lot of things. I mean, there's no response. And they were talking about non-interventionism. Everyone was like, we shouldn't intervene. Even the people who say they're going to intervene, think twice before they do it. They run entire campaigns on, we believe in intervention. We're going to bomb the shit out of ISIS and everything. But it's one of the most non-interventionist presidents ever.
Right.
Donald Trump, right?
But when it comes to cheaper products, I don't think people are actually that tolerant to higher prices than they say are. I mean, people might say that they would accept paying higher, but they're not going to. I mean, people's behavior changes when prices go up. But I think when it comes to policies, the thing is that instead of trying to be like, oh, we could make things locally, because people could just make nationalist arguments and stuff. When it comes to money, you will see people's true, behavior. Like people talking is cheap. Okay, people do want cheaper products. I just think there's better alternatives to China. There's a lot of, especially as incomes in China start growing, getting cheaper products shouldn't limit the world to just looking at China. And I think that's something that, again, I might lose a lot of fans here, was something that Obama understood, but also made some mistakes. I mean, the TPP and getting closer to countries like Philippines, India, Vietnam, Cambodia, these are a lot great. But China, China made a move on these countries now, given how the United States failed to get closer. And Trump also is failing to get closer. China is now, Philippines for a while was getting closer to the United States and against China, right? But even after all the battles that they had with China over the islands, Philippines is now realizing the United States is not going to be there to defend them. And now Philippines is even now giving in to China and as accepting them as a superpower to be allied with rather than the United States. So, but there was an alternative to look for other countries that could produce a cheap product and services.
Public perception is changing, right? So I read recently that the Chinese government had put out an ad. The Chinese embassy in Manila put out an ad called 1C in Chinese, and was a song, and it was trying to salute the Filipino healthcare workers. And the average Filipino, if you look at the YouTube video that they released, the Chinese propaganda, all the comments, it was like they got ratioed. So it seems like your average Filipino, as are the other citizens of neighboring countries, are actually growing increasingly skeptical about China's intentions.
Depends on the area, because I see another counterexample was that in Davao City, China, for example, donated a whole bunch of test kits to the Davao to against COVID-19, and the comments there were mostly positive, right? But
because they didn't get the defective ones, right?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
That's been a problem.
Yeah,
that by the way, is still not clear. We still don't know which ones are. There's a lot of them that are defective. The data still isn't completely out on that, the false positives and false negatives.
So, but the thing is, whatever the public perception is, the government seems to be moving towards more working with China rather than against China. So, I mean, this government doesn't, So, and whatever, this government is so popular that whatever they do, people will get behind. So again, I think whatever the people think about China in Philippines, the government and other governments are realizing that United States is not going to be there for the rescue. I mean, even Obama didn't say much. Like when the deal that Philippines has with the United States is like, hey, you guys will defend us militarily if we ever get like threatened, right? And that was the understanding after World War II. And then when China came out and we're like, hey, these are our islands, and Philippines looked at the United States, Obama was like, what do you want us for, right? So there was not that much pushback against China, and Philippines is now realizing, like, I guess I have to work with China. So it's like, I mean, they're just gifting this whole area to China right now.
Yeah, that was actually, so, that journalist Jack Posobiec, I can't really pronounce his name. So he's very like he has a hard on for this America First policy.
Oh, Jack Posobiec.
Yeah. So one of the things that I pushed back on was this policy that when America retreats from this world role, that China, it's just leaving a vacuum for Putin and China to just step in, because at the end of the day, because the reason why they do that is that they are very insecure leaders, right? They are insecure about their own mandate at home. So the best way to shore that up is for the international community to basically give them signs of legitimacy. And that's why they want to be involved in the WHO, they want to be involved in the UN, because all of that, other countries depending on them, that's legitimacy from the outside, and it can prop them up. And that's why they're so invested in this. And you're right, for all the countries in Southeast Asia that used to look to the United States as having their back, being their backbone in this part of the world. And by the way, the US really helped Southeast Asia when it came to, during the period where Southeast Asia was very unstable and volatile, fighting off communist red waves that were, insurgent during the 1950s to the 1990s. In fact, Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore leaders, all three of the prime ministers actually supported the U.S. in the Vietnam War, because the U.S. bought them a lot of time to push back on the red wave.
Mm-hmm.
So this is history repeating itself, just in the same way that the British Empire started taking a back seat after the whole Suez Canal mess, and a long time before that. It was like a voluntarily withdrawal from being an empire. They were like, okay, we're tired of this shit. We don't want to control the whole world. Mm-hmm. And we're just going to start taking a back seat. This is not working for us. This is too expensive. And then the vacuum that they created, United States came and filled that vacuum that the British Empire just left for them. And it just seems right now that United States is also voluntarily starting to be like, you know what, we're just going to become a little bit more focused on home.
Yeah,
we don't want to.
It's driven by populists on the right and on the left.
Right, and China is going to come and try to fill that vacuum that United States is leaving. The problem is, unlike when the British Empire took a backseat and United States filled it, they were both at least somewhat influenced by Enlightenment values, right? And those values, as much as we want to call them hypocrites and stuff, it did kind of managed. I mean, it did at least force them to pretend that they stand for human rights, and that had an impact on their policies. You cannot pretend that it didn't. I just think like China doesn't even have to pretend that they stand for human rights when they start filling that vacuum. And I think like if people were upset with the British Empire or United States being the world police, they're going to miss both of them when China fills that role. I mean, is human rights is going to completely take a backseat if China fills that vacuum?
No. So
completely. And they're going to export their techno-surveillance authoritarianism to the rest of the world through their technology. I mean, they're the ones manufacturing, they're in competition with us for implementing 5G and all these other technologies on which their entire states are going to be built on.
But isn't there a little bit of hope to think that, and this is something I've been saying, and I don't know how true it is, it's just a hypothesis, that as their GDP per capita grows, the demand for Enlightenment values, free speech, democracy is going to grow within. Because as GDP per capita grows, the balance of power will shift away from governments, usually away from governments towards the people. And when people start climbing the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're going to go beyond wanting food and shelter and safety to wanting to have more of a say. And that's just naturally going to shift the values of the country.
I was under no illusion that would take place, and primarily because the country I grew up in has one of the highest GDP per capita anywhere in the world. And there was no change in the demand for political freedoms. In fact, the argument that is very successfully promoted in Singapore, that is widely believed by the populace, is that who cares about political freedom? Look at what political freedoms buy you in the United States. So this is a country where despite all the riches, you still have.
But that's why I say generally. That's why I say
Saudi Arabia was like that too, and so is Kuwait.
No, okay, Saudi Arabia is not. Those are not good examples.
Qatar, Kuwait, Dubai, like these are
Ali,
in that sense.
I'm talking. You guys are talking about specific examples. First of all, Saudi Arabia is not a good example. No matter how rich people are.
There's others.
Let me finish my point, Ali, please. When the government has access to gold coming out of the ground, like black gold coming out of the ground, the balance of power is not going to shift that much away from people to the government, okay? Mm-hmm. But you could come up with examples. I'm talking about actual studies that shows that this is a general trend, okay? Democracy and freedom of expression and people's wealth, average wealth, not the government's wealth, but people's wealth relative to government's wealth, does promote democracy and other values.
That may be correlations. What you're seeing might be correlations rather than causations.
No, it's a two-sided. No, actually, I'll send this to you. It's a two-sided.
Last thing, I just want to say one thing. We're kind of. Okay, I'll let you finish. I'm just pulling a Kanye here. We are running out of time, so I do want to talk about ID and then patron questions.
Yeah, I know, but this is about the future. Okay, so so they actually what studies show is actually a two-sided thing, right? So freedom brings wealth, but wealth also brings freedom. It actually showed there's a two-sided relationship, right? So. But again,
I just don't know how you're proving that it is the.
I'll send you. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying the studies, and the studies might be wrong, and I can send this to you. I'm just saying that there's a glimmer of hope there that this might be true. Okay. I don't know. I have no idea because I didn't do the study myself, and I have seen plenty of studies that are wrong. Okay. So I'm just putting that out there as an alternative, and I could send it you. I'll send it your way, and you could tell me how good it is. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. So I want to move on. So Melissa, you're also the managing director of Ideas Beyond Borders. So we'll talk about that a lot because that has a lot to do with what the work that you do in the Arab world, right? Yeah. But before that, I had one more question. How do you see things changing after the pandemic? So I know that Tom Friedman, wrote an article about this, and he was talking about how distance learning is going to become a bigger thing. He was talking in terms of China. He said you might see more 3D printers and more people sort of manufacturing if they need surgical masks or ventilators. They can up that kind of production here using technology like 3D printers, so they can phase China out of that as a factor, as something that they're dependent on.
There will be a geopolitical alignment after this. You're starting to see that already. Japan said that they were going to pull out all their manufacturing of China, out of China as far as possible. So, Australia said the same thing.
Is that even possible? I mean, especially in Australia, where correct me if I'm wrong, but China has a lot of influence in Australia's policy. Like they have a lot of.
They import Australian beef. So
But they also have a lot of politicians that are completely funded by China.
But Armin, let me just, Melissa, go ahead. Just complete your thought.
So I think China has, in a way, overplayed their hand in this pandemic. And when there's this quote I really like, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And I think they really have shown the world who they are. So a lot of countries, Europe, are going to wake up to this. Countries that previously signed into one Belt, One Road might take a step back. And then in terms of just our lifestyles, it's going to change. How often you hug strangers. It's going to change, like you said, distance learning, and even just things like remote work, right? So a lot of people have found now that they can do just the same job or even be more productive without having to go into the office. You will probably see, like I read somewhere actually in New York Post, that 30% of New Yorkers who moved out, who escaped the city to ride out the lockdown, are not going to come back. Mm-hmm. So that might change the politics, right? Like, in terms of urban centers in the United States tend to be blue. Now, if you have people moving out of New York to, say, Texas, that's going to change what that means for politics as a whole. So we're only beginning to understand how everything shifts. But it's going to be...
I think that's one of the most interesting things that I'm reading a lot about. And I just in terms of how much we can predict how these things will change. I just like the fact that everybody's turned into me now. I was like, I get to stay at home. I'm a homebody. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to hug anybody. I don't have to shake hands. It's amazing. This is great.
But when it comes to China's influence, though, are you like? It seems like the way you're presenting things is like as if we're in a very pessimistic. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not pessimistic, but I'm just saying, like, is there any hope? Like, it seems like China is just going to come. Yeah,
Armin is looking for an alternative to pessimism.
Well, no, if you look at opinion polls, at the end of the day, democracies are extremely responsive to public opinion. And it looks like public opinion, at least in the United States and especially in the UK, have really turned against China. So we'll probably see even someone like Boris Johnson walk back the 5G deal. Because just before this happened, the UK signed a deal with Huawei. And I think a lot of these things are going to be reconsidered.
Mm-hmm.
So this is...
Sorry.
This is what China is going.
Last question on this.
This is what China is going to do. Is going to basically use arguments like Saudi Arabia and Iran use and call it bigotry, right? And I think like we've seen a lot of people that called us and other people bigots for calling out like Saudi Arabia or Islam are now coming out and saying like they're trying to raise the alarm against China, and people are calling them bigots, and now they're being hypocrites. They're like, this is not racism. This is, we're not against the Chinese people. We're against the Chinese government. And we're like, yes, we've been saying the same thing to you for many.
They're going to exploit the sentiment, the ethnic sentiments of the diaspora, and there are Chinese in every country. There are Chinese in Indonesia and Malaysia. They're going to exploit that connection and try to make them sympathetic to the motherland. You'll see that. And then anyone that turns against and criticizes the CCP like me will be you guys. I will be, racist and xenophobic and
so we're gonna see the rise of just like we had the rise of ex-Muslims from that movement. We're gonna see a lot of Chinese Americans or Chinese British people coming out and saying like, no, it's good to call out China. This is accurate. And then they're going to be called Uncle Toms. We're going to go through all of this. We're going to have like the same thing repeat itself.
Yeah, I feel like in some cases it's already happening. Melissa, so we're going to, let's just talk about IBB. There's also a question actually related just to that. They're asking about whether you've been Ben Affleck, and we'll talk about that. Right. Has anybody ever been Affleck? Yeah. Has anybody ever been Affleck to you because of your views on China and called you sort of Uncle Tom and everything, which I assume is yes. So IBB, you guys have translated some amazing books, including like Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now, even Sam Harris's Lying, Thomas Paine, a lot of these sort of enlightenment thinking, secular books into Arabic. And not just that, but also countless articles, Wikipedia pages, I remember when IBB was starting out, and Faisal was super, super pumped about it, and it's amazing what he and you both achieved together. Did you consciously go into the translation thing, or did you find that was the most effective way, or are there also other things that you do?
I think when we first received, seed funding, and somebody said to Faisal, "Hey, I really believe in you and the things that you're talking about. Well, why not you start your own organization?" It was pretty, between that time and the time we sort of designed the first programs, it was very clear that there was a huge need and a huge hunger to plug this knowledge deficit gap between the Arabic world and the English-speaking world. A lot of the things that you and I can read and access just wasn't available in that language, and it wasn't free. And so, it was one of those things too that it was pretty obvious that book industries were just decimated after the war and all that strife. So they Cairo used to have a very bustling publishing industry, but that after ISIS and all that, it's all dead. So then you had the rise of smartphone technology, right? The penetrance of smartphones is so high, even in the Gulf regions. So all these things kind of fit together, and we realized, like, wait a minute, what if your average housewife in Saudi Arabia is curious about certain ideas, but just holding a book, an atheist Muslim book, for example, it literally says atheist Muslim on the cover, it could be punishable by death, for example, right? In that part of the world. So what if you could have a digital, just platform where you could be reading all these texts, and when the husband comes home, immediately you don't know what your wife is reading, and maybe if we expose enough people to different ideas, that would sort of usher in the right mindset for people to start embracing pluralism, to challenge their dogmatically held beliefs. That was really the theory of change.
Any interest to move to, I don't know, maybe you already have translating to like Urdu and Persian?
Of course, but the only reason we did Arabic first, other than just sheer need, I think the 10% of English Wikipedia was actually in Arabic only, and when we started, that was when we started. Now it's at 17%. But the reason for that is simply because of Faisal's connections. He knew a lot of translators who could do this for us, and it's really a movement. By the way, some of these people are heroes. They have gotten death
They
threats.
are, yeah. I've read about them, and it's I donated to. But
if you guys are interested in more Persian translators, I could put, like, we have a lot of networks in Iran that would be very interested in being volunteers for like projects like this. Like, we could put the word out.
Would love that. Yeah.
Okay.
There was also questions about whether we could do like Bahasa, Bahasa Indonesian or something like that.
Oh yeah.
It's just a matter of do you have the right connections to get like the coordination part of this. This is why it's hard work, and all credit to Faisal, who's able to leverage all of that and build a real movement from the ground up of these young people who are just interested in science and ideas. That part is impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I really believe in the translation project, and in both directions, right? I think like this is basically removing the geographical and language barriers, and this is what the Enlightenment movement right now needs for us to be, because there's not that many of us in every location. So we need to find a way for us all to work with each other globally, and one of the major barriers right now is the language barrier.
And actually, so there's, like you said, the other way, we had interest to actually translate the works of liberal Arabs thinkers into English as well.
Yeah. And there's plenty of that. There's actually a lot of poets.
But not just the work of their thinkers, but what I was thinking the other direction is the messages of common people about their situations and what they're thinking and what they're worried about, their fears, their dreams, their hopes. Sending them, like, imagine if we get voicemails in Arabic and in Persian and in Urdu and in Malay, and then we translate that in English with subtitles, and people could see, like, what do atheists in Pakistan, not the ones that can't speak English. I mean, Pakistanis mostly speak English, the ones with internet. But let's say, like, I don't know, like in Bangladesh, right? What are they worried about? What do they want? And like that, getting their, I think people care because like it's great to translate intellectual work, but if we want to reach a wider audience, I think telling people stories makes people care for them. Like I think a lot of people just dismiss a whole bunch of other people just because they don't understand it, they don't know what they want, they see them as other. But if you could just translate what they have to say, then that connection will be built, and you end up getting a whole bunch of people that say like, these people that have, are very much, I don't know. I just think like stories always work. Like,
you're right, and it's a cultural bridge because at the end of the day, if you look at what's depicted of Muslims in that country is a certain image you see on TV, right? It's a hijabi. It's there's an average mindset of what somebody from, say, Bangladesh looks like. But exposing people to this idea that, wait a minute, there are other people that think like me. There are other people that appreciate certain freedoms. All of a sudden, it kind of breaks down this idea that there's a monolithic, archetype out there. Mm-hmm. It breaks down a lot of barriers.
Yeah,
by the way, just a shameless plug. This is why Secular Jihadists, when we reach 500 patrons, we're going to start translating our most important shows into Arabic, Persian, or Urdu as well, because we really believe in the translation. So if you're not a patron, become a patron, but also go support IBB because they're already doing what we think is the most effective thing to do.
So you said that. Would you guys put subtitles on your videos? Is that how?
Yeah. You said that the translators are heroes, and I know I've read a few things about them. Have any of them gotten into trouble? There have been issues. I think a few of them had to move. A few of them had to move. One of them in particular, because he was working on a lot of evolution texts, he was translating into Arabic evolutionary biology specifically, received hit pieces against him by the Muslim Brotherhood.
Oh, wow. Who is this? I can't say.
No, you can't. I think it's pretty obvious who he's. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious who he is. But he had to move anyway, so he moved to Turkey.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if any of these heroes are safe enough to be interviewed, introduce them to us.
Oh, we'd love to.
Yeah.
Actually, that's probably a good idea.
Right.
And we'd love to kind of give them voices too, because now they're going to have their own stories.
You know what? It's really it's actually really all them. Like, because without their efforts and their bravery to do this, these texts wouldn't exist, right? They're making knowledge freely available for others like them. So in a way, it's a youth-led movement, right? That's it's based in the Middle East, and that's what I really like about the whole program.
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing, and just to keep doing what you can. And I think people should, it's an amazing cause, and if you can donate to it, the link is going to be in the description. And we'll send you there. Melissa, we've taken a lot of your time. Do you have
patron questions?
Do you have to run, or can you take a couple of patron questions?
I can take questions.
Okay. So I want to start actually with Umayma. Umayma Muhammad she's a previous guest here. So she was raised as a Salafi Muslim, and now she's actually one of the most articulate people that I know. So she's talking about Trump and his policies on China, and how you said that it was they were framing it differently. That you wish that he had framed it differently in a more global context. So she's saying surely he didn't frame it that way because he doesn't understand it from that angle. Do you believe Trump can engage with this on the level that we need him to, like have that innovative or that different Chinese that policy towards China that we would like, but frame it in that global context that you like?
I think Trump is very responsive to how he's perceived and how popular something can be. And with the right advisors in the White House, I think he could. I just don't know who right now in the White House is going to nudge him in that direction, because it does seem that at least he's pretty amenable to some influence,
he keeps firing.
That much seems
right.
That's true.
Yeah, so there's also
I don't know.
Like he gets convinced by the last person he talks to, and then you're like, oh, this is great, and then they get fired. That's what that's difficult to figure out.
He's a sponge. His views reflect the last person he just talked to.
Yeah. A blonde infidel is asking, what does Melissa think is the best way we can counter this information battle? What would you suggest?
We need to actually fund it. We need to invest more effort and funds to basically counter the Chinese narrative. And that's something that we're not really doing. China is so good at it because it's centralized, it's coordinated, it's like a whole affair. And we're not invested in this game. We have all our different media companies, they all have their own agendas, all, responding to their financial incentives, clickbait and things like that. But we don't have a coordinated response to the propaganda. That's actually something, so because of all the propaganda in Arabic that we were noticing, so IBB started creating videos to counter it.
Oh, you did?
That kind of thing, yeah. To specifically the COVID-19 conspiracies, specifically that. And again, you have to, when you're doing something like that, trust is so important, right? So if people look at your organization and think, oh, this is just an arm of the CIA, you can forget about people subscribing to your feed and thinking that this is legitimate. And that's the long ball game that we need to play. We need to win hearts and minds. We need to build trust. And it's, once you're seen as if you can be painted in some way as just an apparatus of some, terrible institution, then you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Last question. So there's to the patrons, there's some questions that you asked about the Belt and Road Initiative, which Melissa already talked about. And then
there were so many good questions. We don't have,
we don't have time, Armin. So the thing is, I'm curating, which is what you do in these situations. And there's stuff that we've already covered. Like we talked about racism against foreigners in China and so on. So this is a question from D-Man. He's asking, COVID-19 has exposed both authoritarians and corporatists. Do you see a fight back now that people see a lack of democracy as a threat to our lives?
Whether they see a lack of democracy as a threat, that's the question?
Yeah, a fight back.
Actually, in a way, yes. And that's only because you have certain countries that are posing sort of a counter propaganda to the Chinese propaganda that authoritarianism is a great model. A good example is Taiwan. As of today, I think Taiwan has hit 21 days without a single reported case of COVID-19. And if there's no better control experiment between freedom and authoritarianism, right? Mm-hmm. You have two countries literally side by side, same people ethnically and everything. And one of them is a fully functioning democracy that cherishes civil liberties and liberalism. And the other is an authoritarian closed system. And to see how Taiwan has handled this and China has handled this side by side, I think yes, this is, and this is the narrative part. We need to raise this as a continuous reminder that authoritarianism is not a good model of governance. In fact, if this pandemic had broken out under Taiwan, it wouldn't be called a pandemic because it would never have spread. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so Joshua Johnson has a good. He's sort of he's half kidding about this, but I think it's a good question. Are you exploring avenues of dropping dank Enlightenment memes on social media in the Muslim world too? Half kidding, half not. So
no, actually, he's right. Yeah, it's not just that. Actually, I really think pop culture too. Memes, pop culture, we need to be exploring this. Like, honestly, the thing about like the Sam Harris books and the Steven Pinker books is that how many people are actually really going to read these things?
Nobody. That's what I'm saying. This is the way that they did by the way, we're all mentioned in that book, right? In Enlightenment Now. So the way that this was done, I mean, when Russia does their sort of 3 a.m. things and all these memes pop up and all these trends show up on Twitter, in the middle of the night, they did it through that. They've been they've been kind of ahead of the curve on this. So why haven't we employed that strategy as well? Like rather than long form podcasts and books and
No, it's good. I think that's what we need to work with marketing professionals. There needs to be a consortium of creatives, people like our friend Mookie, who think like that, who think in terms of memes, what's popular, trends. Because look at the latest Chinese propaganda. I don't know if you saw it. They made a movie using Lego men, like Lego movies, right? Animated.
Mookie would have loved that too. He's like a total Lego freak.
But see how effective this propaganda was. It basically showed how the United States bungled the whole response using Lego characters.
Isn't that copyright info?
Thank you. I hope they can sue them. But China doesn't care about this stuff. They copy everything.
I got it. So we're gonna cut it there. There's a lot of comments here. People really enjoyed this. Blonde Infidel saying thank you, Melissa. It was great to hear your thoughtful take on these issues. Lois is saying thank you so much
for listening. We'll definitely get our head translator on this really amazing guy. Like his stories alone are worth.
Yeah.
Yes, Ali, please. Can you send them? Ali is in charge of our guests. Ali, can you invite some?
Let me know, and we can do that because we have a good chunk of this actually goes out to the Muslim world, as we talked about before.
I love your logo too. The name, the logo, it's brilliant. Thank you guys for doing what you're doing, and I see all of us kind of like fighting the same fight, but from different angles.
Yeah.
But somehow it's going to converge, and like we all want to live in the same world.
We do.
Yeah. Can you yourself also come back on the show?
Of course, whenever.
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah, it would be awesome. Thank you for your time, Melissa. Really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.